a lot has changed in just 1 year.
Just around the time that the Modi government was launching a mega infrastructure project on the Great Nicobar Island, the government maps of the island changed.
Just look at the green band, right? That's almost completely disappeared from this side, as well as this side. Something very interesting about corals is that they need to be in certain shallow depths. So there is no way that corals can move deeper than this depth. It's just not possible.
So if you have corals here in Galicia Bay, you cannot build a port, but you take them away and the port becomes possible. It takes thousands of years for coral reefs to form. But once they take shape, these underwater formations stay put because the marine organisms that make them up cannot move. But in India, the biologically impossible has happened. Corals have moved, and in just 1 year, because the government wanted them to. Hello and welcome to True Story. Today I have with me on the show my colleague Vaishnavi Rathore, who's possibly won every journalism award that exists in the country for environmental reporting. Right, Vaishnavi?
Gosh, no, there has to be some left for future ambitions.
Well, sorry to put you on the spot. Unlike what most people assume, journalists don't quite like having the spotlight on themselves. They'd rather that the attention be on their stories. And what an incredible story Vaishnavi has recently reported. She found that just around the time that the Modi government was launching a mega infrastructure project on the Great Nicobar Island, the government maps of the island changed. The corals that existed all along the coastline of the island disappeared, only to reappear in the middle of the sea. Well, Vaishnavi, that's what we're going to be unpacking on this show. How did the corals disappear? Can corals actually move and so conveniently?
No. So according to all the experts that we spoke with, and these are people who are biologists, who are marine biologists, they've worked on the island for years, there's nothing that explains why and how these corals can move. It's also, like you said, it's biologically impossible for this to happen, right? And something very interesting about corals is that they need to be in certain shallow depths for them to exist and be able to survive. And that's because they need that sunlight to photosynthesize. And for that, they need to be between 5 meters to 20 meters of depth. So there is no way that corals can move in a way that's deeper than this depth. It's just not possible.
Well, let's roll back a bit. Assuming that many people tuning into the show already know about the Great Nicobar Island, some perhaps don't, and even those who are familiar with the island perhaps haven't traveled to it, and you have. Tell us more about the island.
So I say this often, that this is possibly the only time that I did a ground story in 6 years of reporting that involved taking a ship to go to the island, right, to report to the site. And so that in itself is quite a journey. So from Port Blair, which is in Andamans, you have to take a ship to Campbell Bay. And that journey takes about 30 hours. And while I was on that journey, I realized really how far apart these two island groups are. Right? And when you're on the island, one of the first things that really strike you is just the forests of that island. It's so dense, it's so green, and I had never seen anything like that.
And you're an environmental reporter who goes to forests quite often.
Correct. And this level of greenery and density, never. And the interesting thing is that almost that entire island is just covered with these like ancient rainforests. Of course, they don't exist in isolation, right? There's a tribe that lives there. They move around, the Shompen tribe. It's been mostly uncontacted, that tribe. And as of today, there are less than 250 members of that tribe.
What is uncontacted?
There's been very little contact with people from the mainland or even other tribes on that island with this tribe. So they prefer to have their life that way in the forest. And they are a hunter-gatherer tribe, a semi-nomadic. So they need to move around. But their contact with anyone other than their own tribe is very, very limited.
And I'm guessing apart from the tribe, There's sort of a lot of flora and fauna in these forests.
Yeah. And the interesting bit about it is that a lot of them are endemic species, which means that they're not found anywhere else in the world. So, for example, there is a type of a monkey called the long-tailed macaque, and I saw a lot of them while I was there on the island. There's a type of a bird called the Nicobar megapode, which I was unlucky with. It's rare to sight. Another bucket list species for me, which I wanted to see in the wild, but I couldn't because I was there in the wrong season, is the leatherback turtles. And they come here every year to this island to lay their eggs. And they do this. One preferred spot for them is a bay called the Galathea Bay, and that's on the southeast side of the island.
And Galathea Bay is where the government wants to build a key part of this mega infrastructure project.
Correct. So,
and that is?
That's the International Transhipment Port. That's the one which, like you said, is coming up in this Galathea Bay.
And an international transshipment port is a place where large container ships can dock?
Correct. So, in that sense, it's different than any other port that you can think of. So, like you said, large container ships need to come and dock here. And what they usually do is they'll dock, they'll unload their cargo, and then smaller ships will take that cargo to, wherever the final destination is.
I want to ask you why the government has picked this spot, but before we get to that, how does this intersect with the coral story?
Right. So, Galathea Bay, like a lot of the island, is where you find corals. There have been several studies that show that there are different type of coral colonies that are found along this entire bay. So, yeah.
And that brings in the maps. I think we'll understand this better if we were to look at the island on the map and see where Galathea Bay is and see where the corals were until 2021, which is when the government announced this mega infrastructure project.
Right. So, before that, just for context, because I think that will help us understand the islands better, there's a regulation called the ICRZ, which is your Integrated Coastal Regulation Zone. And what it basically does is that it's going to mark on an island or on a coastal state what are the features that are ecologically sensitive. So, it could be mangroves, it could be turtle nesting grounds, it could be corals, right? And so, that's integral because that's what we'll first see on this map, right?
Sure.
So, all the green part that you see all around, this is the southern part of Great Nicobar. So, you see a green marking everywhere here, right? That is an indicator that this is ICRZ1, which is the most protected status that can be given under this regulation.
What do we mean by protected?
Right.
Protected from what?
Right. So, this would mean protection from any kind of activity that could harm these ecologically sensitive features. So, it means that any kind of development activity that could, say, destruct the corals would be prohibited. Or it could mean that you cannot build a new industry here. But very key to our story is that this also means that you cannot build a major harbor or a port here.
Now, before we go on, I think this is important to talk about who's made this map. We say that this is a government map, but how exactly?
Right. So, there's an institute called the National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management. So, this is an institute that comes under the Ministry of Forest, right? And what it does is that any state that has coast or an island, it helps them implement this regulation that I was talking about. They are the ones who have made these maps.
Right. They make these maps annually?
Right, they do.
Okay, so this is 2020. What do we see on the 2021 map?
Right. So, let's go on to the 2021 and you will see that a lot has changed in just 1 year, right? Just look at the green band.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, that's almost completely disappeared from this side as well as this side.
And in the Galathea Bay.
Correct. From the Galathea Bay, it's completely vanished.
And how is there a green blob right here in the middle of the sea?
So, if you were to go with what the map is indicating, this means that suddenly in the middle of the sea, there's some sort of ecologically sensitive feature that has appeared, which needs to be protected with this most protected status.
And what is that?
Right. So, let's move on. Again, this is 2020 map, right? What the blue that you see is the corals. So, this is a very coral specific map, which again the same institute has made. So if you were to compare
I can see the blue and the green correlate really well.
Correct. So which means that we have corals present on this island, right? Including the Galathea Bay. You can see it, the light blue that's there. But again, just like what our last change showed us, 2021 again is showing us that the blue has completely gone away from all of this side.
So no corals here now.
No corals.
Galathea Bay has no corals.
Correct. But instead, what we see, like in that green sort of blob that has come up, we see that corals is what that ecologically sensitive feature seems to be.
Right. So basically this green blob is like a coral reef.
Correct. That's what the map is indicating.
That's pretty extraordinary that corals have now appeared in the middle of the sea. Now let me play devil's advocate. What if the 2020 map was inaccurate? That this government institute had so far gotten it wrong, and in 2021 they finally did the work to establish where corals are, and they found that corals are actually here.
No, so very happy to give that kind of benefit of doubt, and we did that as well while we were investigating the story. And so I spoke with a biologist who's worked here. His name is Vardhan Patankar, and he clearly explained what I was saying earlier, that for corals to exist, they need to be in a specific depth in the ocean because they need the sunlight. And at this level of depth, this is much further than what corals would be able to survive on.
But why do corals need to be in shallow waters?
So they depend a lot on the sunlight. Like any other living creature, they need the sunlight to be able to photosynthesize. So ideally, they need to be between 5 meters of depth to about 25. Anything beyond that becomes too dark for them to be able to make their food and survive.
Right. But how do we know? How do we know the depth of the ocean?
Right. Very interesting map that tells us, which is called the bathymetric map. And what it does is, it basically, all the numbers that you see here on the map, right? Those are all ocean depth. So it's telling us how deep the ocean is at different points. So to make sure, to actually know exactly where the corals are, right? I overlaid our coral map, this one, onto our bathymetric map.
So basically you compared this and this.
Correct. So it goes much deeper than what ideally corals would need to survive.
That's tremendous investigative work, Vaishnavi. Perhaps most people don't know, but journalists really like being detectives. I think we grew up watching and reading too many detective stories. But again, I'm playing devil's advocate. What if you got it wrong? Isn't there a more authoritative source that we can rely on for this, to be sure of where the corals are? Yeah,
interestingly, that authoritative work is government's own work. So we have one document, which is the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment of the upcoming project, right? And it very clearly says that there are existing coral colonies in the Galathea Bay that will have to be translocated or shifted from here for that port to come up. If you are translocating something, it means that it exists at this point, right?
Right.
And similarly, another solid report that we have is by ZSI, the Zoological Survey of India, which again is an institute that comes under the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And that clearly also lists down what species of corals we have in the island, specifically in Galathea Bay as well.
But now we also have a government source that's saying that the corals don't exist there. Is there a source which is not the government source and which we can rely on?
Correct. So there is a international sort of source that one usually looks at, and that is something that was formed by the Arizona State University, and what it's called the Allen Coral Atlas. And what it does is uses very high value satellite images, high quality satellite images, to identify where all in the world there are corals present. So if you were to log into it right now and you look for Great Nicobar Island, it will clearly show you not just Galathea Bay, but the entire island is kind of, there are corals hugging the coast all across the island.
Well, you can't really contest satellite imagery. That's like as definitive as it gets.
Right.
So there's all of this voluminous evidence that shows that there are corals along the coastline of the Great Nicobar, but a government institute in India has made them disappear. And it's not hard to understand why. As Vaishnavi explained, the presence of corals means that this area becomes protected from certain economic activities which include building a port. So if you have corals here in Galatea Bay, you cannot build a port, but you take them away and the port becomes possible. And now I want to ask you something that we referred to earlier. Why is the government wanting to build a port here? Why of all places Galatea Bay?
So Galatea Bay offers something very unique and very important, which is that it has a natural depth of about 20 meters, right? Now, what happens is, when we're talking about transshipment ports, right, these are large container ships. When they park or when they dock, they need that kind of depth in the ocean for them to be able to unload their cargo. This kind of depth is not naturally found easily. So in India, as of today, there's only one other place which is being developed as a transshipment port, and that is Viringam Port in Kerala. So when you don't have these kind of ports within the country, India at present is dealing with all of its transshipment cargo outside, which is very expensive. And the second thing what Galatea Bay is able to offer, and by that logic Great Nicobar Island, is that it's very close to an international trade route, the Malacca Strait, which is where almost 35% of global trade is kind of taking place here. So 2 checkpoints for Galatea Bay, because then you're going to give it a lot of economic advantage. Like, the argument was this, that
it is a compelling argument, I must say. I mean, if India is able to capture a part of the shipping that happens along this route, and it's very, very important, I can see why there will be many people advocating for this project. But are there others who know how shipping routes work, who have any skepticism about it?
Right. So I did speak with shipping experts who know this area and how shipping industry works, and they do seem to be quite doubtful about how viable this kind of port would be over here. And the main reason for that is that, again, this is an island, right? When you need to unload that material and send it across, you'll have to send it across to India's mainland, where the closest port is Chennai on the eastern side, which is still about 1200 kilometers away from the island. So imagine the amount of money you'd have to spend on these smaller feeder ships to send all this material to, to Chennai. And the other thing is that in this geographical region, there's already existing very efficient ports that have been working. So you've got Colombo, you've got Singapore, you've got Malaysia, that offer immense competition. So it's really then a very big question mark on if this port that's going to come up here, will it actually be able to attract that kind of commercial interest?
Right. I mean, there's always a trade-off between the environment and the economy, as we know. It happens even on the mainland. There are all of these economic projects that are coming up, which are going to damage the environment, uproot a forest. But sometimes there are economic arguments advanced for it. In this case, what you're saying is that it's actually more complicated. It's not like we'd suddenly become a transshipment hub.
Correct.
If we build the port here. We've been focusing on the corals in the conversation so far. But from your reporting, I know that there's a lot more at stake. Why don't you tell us about that?
Right. So if you look at it ecologically, right, all these amazing wildlife species that we were talking about, they face so much threat with the loss of biodiversity right now. We are talking about as many as 1 crore trees that would be cut for this project. Those are habitats of these wildlife species. And remember, like I said, this is endemic, right? Many of these species are endemic. If you lose them here, it means they are going to be extinct. That is what we are talking about. And beyond that, of course, the Shompen tribe, like I was saying, they, like I said, they are a semi-nomadic tribe, right? They move around in the forest. They need that movement. And in the words of what a government official had told me, he said it very clearly that wherever trees are going to be cut, the Shompen is going to be impacted. And that's simply, it's as simple as it gets for the Shompen tribe. But another thing that I think we should talk about is that the project's own estimates tell us that once this project is up and running, the number of people that are going to be living on this island, right, is going to increase by as much as 4,000% of the existing population. 4,000% on this small island that already has carrying capacity challenges.
What do you mean by carrying capacity challenges? That sounds like jargon to me.
When I was there on the island, petrol had run out. There were a lot of vehicles standing in a line at that one petrol pump station, right? LPG cylinders were in shortage. People were kind of asking their neighbors if they had extra. And then people also told me how in the summer they usually face a drinking water challenge, right?
Right. Are there no drinking water sources?
They are, but I mean, it's an island, right? So fresh water is hard to find. And so it becomes very challenging with the available resources that are there on the island to even sustain the population that exists right now. Imagine this place suddenly being crowded or over time being crowded by as much as 4,000% more people.
Well, some would argue that once the port comes up, then you can ship everything to the island, including petrol and water. But what you said, earlier has stayed with me, that you said 1 crore trees are going to be cut for this. That's like 10 million?
That's right, yeah, 10 million, yeah.
And the government knows this? It's part of the government's reports?
So interestingly not. This was, for the longest time, a lot of reporters, activists, we were using numbers that the government had told us, which is around 8.5 lakh trees. That's the number they told us that they are going to be cutting down. But a rainforest ecologist got in touch with us, and he explained to us that if you look at the density of the forest, right, this number does not make sense. 8.5 lakh would make sense if you're talking about a region like Rajasthan or Gujarat, which has more sparse population. For here, if you use the correct density of forest, it's possible that the number of trees that would be cut could be as high as 10 million.
And this forest isn't just like any other forest, right?
Correct, yeah.
It's a tropical rainforest.
That's right, yeah.
So what was the government all along planning? If it's going to butcher a tropical rainforest, we have a program called compensatory afforestation.
Yeah.
So how are they going to compensate for it? Not that you can ever compensate for a forest.
Yeah, and that is an update which is possibly the first update that looped me completely in the Great Nicobar story. Compensatory afforestation that you're talking about, right? About 3 years ago, the government said that, yeah, we are going to be cutting these many trees here. We'll compensate for it, but in Haryana. And you can imagine the difference, right? This is a different state, different geography. And so the species are going to be completely different of what you can grow versus what you're cutting down, right? And this was so absurd, I remember when we heard about it. I'm telling you, that's the story that looped me in, and we've kind of stayed with it.
I remember. That's the first story that you did connected to the Great Nicobar project.
Yeah.
And then we started mulling over the possibility of sending you there to report from the island. I've worked with you for 4 years, Vaishnavi. I haven't seen any other story that you've done that's completely consumed you. You've really gone at this story from every possible angle. And a result of that is the book lying in front of you.
Yay, yes. Yep. So this is edited by Pankaj Seksaria. And if you go through the contents, there are some very interesting work that you have of researchers, journalists that have worked on the island and different aspects. So ecology is one thing, but you also have very interesting articles about how it's going to change the culture, the language of the tribes that are present here. So yes, interesting one.
And your work is one of the chapters.
Correct. So sometime last year is when we got in touch with an anthropologist. His name is Vaishnavi Rathore, and he had worked on the islands for a long time. And a few years ago, the administration got in touch with him saying that we want you to prepare a document wherein you can tell us how any kind of upcoming development project could impact the tribal communities. And he chose the medium of video, and he went to Great Nicobar and spoke with different communities, including the Shompen. And that is possibly the only video documentation we have of what the Shompen think about the upcoming project. And they very clearly in that video say that don't use our hills for this. You can use the coast, but don't use our hills. Very important documentation that Vishwajit Pandya did, and he submitted it to the government. But that was never published, that report. And so when we interviewed him, we interviewed what it took to go to the island, to converse with the Shompen, but also what it means to not have this very important work see the light of the day. And so that chapter is here. It's called Can of Worms, because that's what Vishwajit Pandya said would happen. It would open a can of worms if this report had been published.
Well, there's one question that I want to ask you, but I do remember that when you traveled to the island, it was not altogether pleasant. And I got a call from you while you were there, which left me very anxious. This is something that we rarely ever talk about as journalists, but perhaps we should.
Right, and I think the irony of that call is that I thought I was having the best day of my life, because I had seen dolphins in the ocean and I was just extremely excited about it. But shortly after is when I was told that the administration is keeping a very, very close eye on who I'm meeting, at what point I'm eating my breakfast, whose car I'm using to interview who. And that kind of surveillance is, of course, an uncomfortable feeling, because you suddenly don't trust anyone around you. But for me, what was bothering me more, having this information, was if I was compromising the anonymity that I had promised when I was speaking with the tribal community, right? And that was something that stayed with me for a long time, because I didn't want to do that. I'd promised them a certain level of anonymity.
Yeah. Well, I know that I was very anxious because as your editor, I'm responsible, and I wanted to make sure that you come back from the island safe, and you did, and you've stayed with the story, which is remarkable.
And interestingly, I mean, in this case, we should know that all the maps are publicly available. It's just a matter of going through it and looking through a lot of maps that are available to see where that change has happened.
Yeah, well, that's a secret that I think as journalists we should keep to ourselves. But a lot of information is public information, and yet it exists on obscure websites. No one's looking, and that allows the government to get away with a lot. It's our job as journalists to get to those sources of information and to bring the stories to you. On that note, we're going to wrap up, and we're going to wrap up with a request. In fact, two. One, if you're listening in and you know more about the Great Nicobar Island and the project that's coming up, and you want to send us a tip-off, you want to point us in the direction of story, please do. Please write to us at letters@scroll.in, letters @scroll.in. We'll protect your anonymity. You can be assured of that. And now the second request. This kind of journalism doesn't come easy. It takes a lot of time, patience, effort, and money. It wasn't cheap to send Vaishnavi to the Great Nicobar Island. In this case, we were able to because people like you contributed to our ground reporting fund. We were able to raise money to put her on a ship and for her to do the work that's brought these stories to you. So please do contribute to our special fundraisers, but more importantly, become a subscriber of Scroll if you haven't already. The information is in the description below. Thanks for watching.